Really? They're making an Ice Age 6? Even though it's universally agreed that the fifth one was completely unnecessary, and even general audiences have become apathetic to the franchise. But that's not the only new sequel in a long-running animated franchise that's coming soon. There's also Shrek 5, Toy Story 5, The Incredibles 3, and Frozen 3. There's also Moana 2, Zootopia 2, and Super Mario Bros. 2. And while those examples are only the second films in their respective franchises, it's clear that there's an oversaturation of animated sequels right now. Of course, several people had argued that for many movies, a sequel isn't needed, as the original film was perfectly fine as a standalone story, and a sequel will feel contrived, especially if it doesn't live up to the expectations set by the first movie, and in a worst case scenario, ending up being so bad that it tarnishes the legacy of the original. It's a common talking point amongst movie fans, that sequels are rarely made because there's a creative way to continue the story, but rather because the first film was so popular that a sequel is almost guaranteed to be a box office success. And yeah, that's completely true. The sad fact of the movie industry that we all must accept is that for studios and producers, this is a business first and foremost. Ergo, whether a sequel is necessary is irrelevant, as the only thing that matters to them is making money. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule, where an entire franchise feels like a complete story, making each sequel a necessary addition. In an ideal world, the Toy Story franchise would have ended with the third film, as it's universally agreed that it was the perfect send-off for the characters, and naturally ties up the story that was told up to that point. But as long as audiences are still going to pay to see new sequels, studios will always have the incentive to continue milking a franchise dry. However, despite all of these facts, the recent reliance on sequels by animation studios has been getting out of hand as of late. The most likely reason is probably the recent pandemic, as nobody was coming to movie theaters during lockdown. And even though it eventually ended, audiences haven't attended theaters as much as they used to, as during that time, they had grown accustomed to streaming, and decided that they prefer to view media in the comfort of their homes. Also, with inflation making the cost of living extremely difficult to pay for, people have little if any money to spare for movies. Therefore, they have to make selective choices on what they watch. Because of this, the movie industry began to struggle, so now, Hollywood believes that it must rely on sequels and IPs more than ever before. However, this results in stagnation, as there seem to be solely mediocre iterations to legacy franchises that had been around for literally decades coming out nowadays. And aside from a few exceptions, it's been extremely difficult for new, original works of art to make their mark in this incredibly tough market, and create an all-new legacy to be enjoyed for generations to come. And so, we're stuck with the same tired franchises that had already reached their peak. Since the intention of most sequels, especially nowadays, is profit, the bare minimum amount of effort is put into the writing and plot. There are certainly inventive stories to tell, with a familiar cast of characters, and the world they live in, when enough imagination is used. But 9 times out of 10, all we get is mediocre, soulless films that fail to recapture the spirit of the first movie. The stories are basic, the returning characters are written with a surface level understanding of their personalities, and the new ones make zero memorable impact. Plus, there's a heavy reliance on cheap and charmless callbacks, used to pander to fans of the original, as well as a substitute for any real substance. It honestly gets pretty exhausting seeing the constant influx of pointless sequels that solely serve as cynical and corporate nostalgia baiting that makes for a pointless movie-going experience. But of course, that is only one part of the problem. There is also the stupidity of studio executives. For example, there was an article that featured an interview of the chief creative officer of Pixar, Pete Docter, where he revealed some concerning information that drew the ire of animation fans. So apparently, the executives at the studio are now advising directors to steer away from personal stories and focus more on appealing to the broadest audience possible. There are also plans to make more sequels to their popular franchises as part of this new direction for the studio. So, they're implying that the recent films such as Turning Red, Luca, and Elemental didn't do too well at the box office was because each of them was heavily inspired by the personal experiences of their respective directors. viewers. This is such a gross assumption that completely ignores the actual reason why these movies were flops. Turning Red and Luca were generally well liked by audiences. It's just they were first put on Disney Plus due to the pandemic, so there wasn't much incentive to watch them again in theaters. As for Elemental, the reason it initially bombed at the box office was because of the awful marketing that made everyone believe that it was going to suck. However, the few people who did go to see it realized that it was actually a good movie, and that it was just done dirty by the poor advertising that failed to showcase its true qualities. And it was really telling that the box office numbers increased significantly during the following weeks from its debut, thanks to word of mouth. This shows a staggering amount of incompetence on the executives' part, as they couldn't be bothered to properly investigate why these movies bombed, but instead, just blindly blamed their failures on the type of stories they told. But hold on, Lightyear was based off of the Toy Story franchise. Shouldn't that maybe prove that sequels and spin-offs are not a guaranteed success? Well, I guess we already established that these studio executives are not the brightest bunch. Well, in the case of that movie, the studio had used the brief lesbian kiss as a scapegoat for its failure, when in reality, it had nothing to do with it. Lightyear was just a straight up bad movie no one wanted to see, but unfortunately, the Pixar executives will use the kiss scene as an excuse to not include LGBT representation in their future films. Unfortunately, while it's not the film's fault, the monster success of Inside Out 2 might give the Pixar executives the incorrect idea that their assumption on personal stories was accurate, and therefore, they'll go forward with the new direction of pandering to the mainstream, with endless sequels. At this point, the future of animation films is looking quite grim. It's likely we'll get less and less original and creative works of art, and more cash grab sequels. I want to remain optimistic that things will eventually change for the better, but that'll require the studio executives to be less stupid, which will probably never happen. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a like, share, and comment, and subscribe to my channel for more content. Anyway, see ya!